Pete Docter, you are the co-writer and director of the Pixar film Soul, which is currently available on Disney Plus. Since it centers around a jazz musician, I was wondering if you actually have an affinity for jazz, and how did that help to shape the story of Soul?
I do. I grew up loving and playing jazz myself. Jazz became such a central theme, not only on a sort of cosmetic level, but also deep symbolism of, okay, we heard a story, Herbie Hancock, the great jazz pianist, told the story of playing with Miles Davis. And he said, we were having a great concert, a great tour. And then he played this chord he said was so wrong that he worried he ruined the whole concert. And he said, Miles just looked at me, he took a breath, he played some notes, and he made my chord right. And he said, I could not figure out how he did that. He said, what happened was he didn't judge what had happened. He just took it as something new. And he did what any great musician should try to do, which is make anything that happens and turn it into something of value. And when we heard that story, we were just like, that is exactly what we're trying to say in the film. You know, we don't control where we're born or what circumstances half the time fall to us, but we can do something beautiful with it. So that jazz really became central to the entire film that way.
Were you able to insert any jazz references into the film that as you said, someone who played jazz, that you were particularly proud of?
Yeah, I mean, well, for one, jazz and animation go way back to like Betty Boop, Louis Armstrong, and Norman McLaren, all the great jazz. I grew up on the Peanuts cartoons with Vince Guaraldi. So I think there's this great affinity between jazz and animation. We were happy to get little references to Oscar Peterson, Bill Evans, let's see who else, George Shearing, all the when you go into the clubs, there are typically these pictures hanging up, and Steve Pilcher, our production designer, did these beautiful paintings that look like portraits, photographs of all those artists. So, and many, many more.
One of the interesting things about the film is that it does have a lot of its roots in a bit of a dark place. And I was wondering, was there ever a concern that the film's subject material would be too dark?
No, I mean, I had confidence from the beginning that we could find the lightness. I think there's a great history of comedy involving death and so on. And at its heart, we felt like this movie is really about life. It's hard to talk about life without making it precious or shining a spotlight on the fact that we're only going to be here for so long. So I think that's where those elements came in. But, I also feel like, look, animation is kind of stuck in a certain place in people's minds, and really for no reason. You don't go to a museum and be like, oh, oil paintings, those are for kids. It's like it could do anything. Animation could really do anything. I feel like that's for those of us who are lucky to be in these places of making films, I feel like that's kind of our responsibility, is to stretch the boundaries of that and ask more of what we're doing.
So Kemp Powers is listed not only as one of your co-writers, but he's also listed as a co-director of the film. Mm-hmm. And what I was curious about is, what exactly did his job entail, and how did it end up intertwining with your role as the director?
Well, when we decided on Joe being a jazz musician, we're like, oh, jazz is a great African-American contribution to the world. It would make sense if our character was Black, right? It would actually be weird if he wasn't. So then when we made that call, we're like, well, we're going to need some help, because I don't know anything about growing up Black. I don't know anything about growing up in New York. I don't know about being a musician. Kemp fit all those qualifications. He came on and initially to really help us flesh out the character of Joe. But the longer he was around, he's a very curious guy. We'd find him down in animation or talking to the set designers or costume. He just had ideas for everything. And it quickly became clear, like, his expertise and knowledge of the subject matter was way beyond me and really what we needed for the film. So as co-director, he was there for every decision. I mean, in the end, I guess, there has to be a single voice, but he just had so many great contributions to the film overall.
Had he ever worked in animation before?
No, but Kemp's like this is already his third career. He's one of these guys who just seems like he can do anything. He was a playwright. He was a music critic before that. So he really took to it very quickly, figured stuff out. I think in animations particularly, you can't write these speeches like you can for the stage that are like 3 pages long. The audience just goes to sleep. So he very quickly adjusted his style of writing to be like, all right, this has to be like a little poem, just like a haiku. He very, very quickly figured all that out.
With a film that is centered around jazz, the score, which is already such an instrumental part of any film, even more so in an animated film, and I imagine that goes triple-fold for an animated film about jazz. Yeah. What was it? How did you? I'm just trying to phrase this correctly. Did you have to have multiple attempts with the score to get it with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross and Jon Batiste to get it just to that right level?
We had to work very differently, or we chose to. I don't know if we had to, but we wanted, just like, in I think the case of everybody on the panel, the actors are recorded first and then the animators fit the movements to that. And we wanted to do that with the music so that Joe could really look like he's playing. So we got John and all the other musicians. We set up, I don't know, like 40 GoPros everywhere. So animators could really reference anything. Oh, and they came up with this really cool software based, using MIDI data. They were able to capture the performance, and the animators could look at the virtual keyboard and the keys would light up. So they knew exactly where the fingers had to go. I think that was all crucial to be able to really feel authentic. I hate it when you go to those movies and there's like an actor and they're supposedly a cellist and they're like sawing away and you're like, you don't play the cello. We wanted to really make it feel like this guy plays, so the study of those musicians was crucial. Even Trent and Atticus, I guess the way they like to work typically, and did with us, was to feed us cues as the story was being formed. So unlike traditionally where you'd post score it, you'd like lock picture basically and then bring the orchestra in. The music was part of the sequences as they grew, as they developed, which was really pretty cool.
What's also interesting about this film is that you have your basic character, your basic types of characters like people and cats, and but then you also have these the characters in The Great Beyond, like the unmatched souls and the people and the characters who are assisting.
The counselors.
Yeah, exactly, and keeping track of everything.
Yeah.
What went into those character designs?
Well, the counselors are supposed to, in our minds as writers, we were thinking, oh, this is like the universe, all the complexity of the 11 dimensions or whatever the universe, distilling itself down in a way that our simple human brains can understand. And so we wanted something to visually represent that didn't look sort of like a person or a soul or whatever. So one of the story artists, Afton Corbin, had done these very cool, almost like UPA drawings of these flat graphic things. And we're like, that's cool, but how could that work in 3D? And then Deanna Marsghialesi, who's in our art department, did these wire sculptures, almost like Picasso or Milt Kahl, one of the great Disney's 9 Old Men, would do these wire sculptures. What's cool is it's like drawing, but in dimension. And so you'd have these forms that are defined very loosely. And that felt exactly right to us. We thought it would be easy. Turned out to be, it turned out to be one of the more difficult characters in the film. In fact, one of the more difficult characters we've done at Pixar, because you basically have these lines that can turn into anything. And that was tricky to pull off.
You also have, as with any Pixar film, you have a great voice cast for the film. How did you settle on people like Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey, and even Graham Norton, who playing Moonwind?
Well, typically what would happen is I would ask, we have a couple of folks who do casting, and we would describe the character. I'd ask them to bring audio clips of the actor, no picture, don't tell me who it is. So we in all cases, we'd had the characters designed. We'd put a picture of our design up, we'd listen to the voices, and some of them would just fit. Graham Norton, I wasn't familiar with, other than, I guess I'd seen his show, but I never would have considered him. And yet he just fit exactly. Jamie Foxx, of course. The weird thing about Jamie is the character of Joe looks like his voice, but doesn't look like Jamie. You know what I mean? Like his voice sounds like it's coming out of both of those guys. It's really kind of strange and mysterious. But we had probably the most international cast that we've ever had on any Pixar film. We got to work with Rachel House, who's from New Zealand, and Alicia Braga is from South America, and the list goes on. It was a really cool cast.
I also have to ask, as someone who is who adores cats, was there someone was it you, or was someone who wanted to make sure that the other main character in this was a cat?
Just to be honest, I'm more of a dog guy, but we had done dogs already on Up, I felt like, and so this was just, we needed a character who could be ambulatory and run around the world and have like a goldfish wouldn't have worked. We needed some character who could move around the world. So Cat seemed really cool, and a lot of great material to work with there too for the humor and animation fun of it.
Well, Pete, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our panel a little bit later.